Die Diaspora spricht.
Parlando.
Diaspora
Conoscere.
Falando.
Diaspora de parler.
Diaspora spricht.
Diasporas speaking.
Përshëndetje. My name is Rina Limoni and I'm the host of Diaspora Speaking. In this episode, I will be joined by Damnjan Jovanović, where together we will discuss what it means to live with one's government's historical legacy and how such legacy becomes a precursor for migration. Welcome to Diaspora Speaking, Damnjan.
Hello, Rina. Nice to be here.
As you might have heard, we start with 3 questions, and these are: where are you from, where did you grow up, and what do you do in your day-to-day?
So, I was born in Montenegro. Back then, it was Yugoslavia, right? Then I quickly moved to Belgrade, Serbia, and that's where I grew up until my 30s. On day-to-day life, I used to be a software engineer until recently, and then I just started my own business right now, which is in developing phase.
You now live in Berlin with your family. When did you move and why did you move to Berlin?
I mean, this question have a very obvious answer from my side, because my wife was moving to Belgrade from Montenegro in 2011. Around that year, Vučić became prime minister. Although I didn't want to pay too much attention to that event itself, it turned out to be the firing event for us to move. Because, I mean, I do remember the one specific day when he turned off the famous TV show. It's calling The Opinion of the Week from the also famous TV station. And for us, that was like a point of no return, that we realized that we don't have to do anything anymore in Serbia, and we want to move and not experience yet another Milosevic for another 10 years and trying to fix the broken system.
You jumped into politics immediately. That is curious, because something that people don't perhaps reflect on, how politics at home, how just a change of leader can trigger your movement, a life abroad, and how you see no future because someone who's recuperating 90s politics may be damaging to their own citizens. And that is clearly an important perspective to mention. But I just want to go back to life in Berlin. When we first spoke, you told me that it wasn't only in Berlin that you had the first Albanian encounter as a Serbian person.
That's so true. Yeah, that's very unfortunate at the same time, like how we are isolated and we don't know anything about each other, even though the people living like literally next to each other, right? So there is like a border in countries, but we don't know anything about each other, and people don't read the news, which coming from Kosovo, from Albania, for example. People don't know how these people live there, right? Like, do some folks in Pristina having a problems, like paying their credits or rents, or I don't know what the youngs doing, what's the job market looking like, and so on and so forth. So, I mean, these things always bothered me in a way, because I knew a lot about what's happening in Croatia and Bosnia. So I think it's maybe because due to the language barrier, partially how the media serve the information. So yeah, it just happened like that the first Albanian person from Kosovo I met here in Berlin, because we never had a chance to meet each other in the countries where we are coming from.
Yes, you told me last time we spoke that the only news that comes from Kosovo to Serbia and Serbian media is about North Kosovo.
Exactly. So I mean, that's also a big problem, that the media assumes that if you are, for example, Serbian, that you're only interested in the Serbian problems, that you never think about what's happening in other communities.
We jumped to politics in this conversation, which is filling the cliche. There is one Serbian person, one Albanian person from Kosovo, and the first thing they need to like we need to get this out of the world before we start the conversation, is the politics, that we understand each other. But we met on LinkedIn, and I think perhaps just to explain to the listeners why this conversation is started in this way, where you wrote me a message regarding how you experienced the war in Kosovo from Serbia. What did this period mean for you then, and how do you reflect on this today?
That was a very strange period, I must say. I have to basically split it maybe in 2 or 3 parts. So the first part is maybe in the 90s when Kosovo wasn't mentioned so much in the media, so it never been on my radar as a young person, right? I never heard about it from the news. Only in the 1998 and obviously 1999, it became a headline, but it was very well covered what was happening. So I know that most of your audience actually coming from Kosovo, right? So they will listen to this. They might not believe, but the way we received information, it was so filtered that we had absolutely no idea what was going on there. Maybe there was a people who knew what's going on there. Maybe people close to some NGOs knew what was going on, but for us who just follow what was on a TV, it was a completely different story. So just the one thing to tell you to illustrate how strange it was, on the day of bombing, I went to school. So you have to understand that we have like absolutely zero idea what's going on around us. So I went to school, I go back home. At that night, the bombing will start with a big shock. You turn on TV, there was some music, like something completely out of context. So you had like no information, what's going on, why it's like that. So of course, we knew that there is something hot happening in NATO. So we knew that there is some bad thing happening in Rambouillet, but not much context, and everything was like hidden until the very day of bombing. And then the bombing started. That was like for me, it was a terrible period. Luckily enough, my father was a retired military officer, and he knew what to do. So he knew everything about the shelters, like food preservation and things. So it was kind of relief, even though we didn't need all of these skills at that moment. But it was kind of relief that we have someone who is expert in that. And that was happening. And in some point, the bombing stops. It was a closed agreement later on in Kumanovo and so on and so forth. Still, things wasn't quite clear what was happening, why it's happening. It was just cover up as that out of nowhere NATO come to us and bombed us, and that all of a sudden we won the war. So that was the narrative. So for people to understand, Milosevic was convincing us that we won a war, even though we saw with our eyes that the NATO troops is actually coming into Kosovo. It was like crazy times. It's really hard to explain. Maybe the only way to explain it is how it's happening right now in Russia. When the Russian people, many of them are just convinced that they are doing a specially military operation. Maybe that's a good answer.
That's an interesting analogy, but do you think that, for instance, in difference to the 1990s, in present day, there is the aspect of the internet? What was lacking in the 90s Serbia? Clearly, I mean, the internet perhaps was present, but not to this extent that it is today. You didn't have the alternative news outlet as you may have today. You can just read the news or Google Translate news from Albanian to Serbian. This aspect is perhaps also important to mention. You're mentioning that you grew up in Serbia during the 1990s, and I imagine NATO bombings, as you're saying, came as a surprise. But beyond this, what does it mean, or what did it mean to be a teen in Serbia during the 1990s?
Outside of this, like a late 90s context, it was very, very rough times. Almost from the 1991, like I was starting my the first grade in 1990, and right away I had to relearn geography because there was no Yugoslavia anymore, and the new all these capitals was not relevant anymore. I mean, like it was so many things happening. That was so rough times. Criminal was everywhere. So just for people to also understand, as in your previous episodes, I listened about how Albania is perceived in the 90s, and it is terrible. We were also cut off from the world. There was a sanctions. Criminal was everywhere, from the small to the big one. Greed was good. Being violent was good. Belgrade was such a violent place in the moment. I remember I was a kid, like maybe fifth grade or something like that. There was a New Year Eve. After the New Year Eve, me and my best friend went downstairs in the front of our building and collecting the bullets and the bullets parts from the machine guns, seeing all sort of criminal business and activities on the streets, like just blooming. The moral values was upside down, like everything was upside down, you know, like everything you learn at home, everything your parents telling you to do, it was just very opposite when you go outside. And as they normally say, like adversity builds character. Mm-hmm. If you are just long enough in such an environment, it does not build your character, it can break it. So I've seen people, like people I love or people I respect, being broken, getting into these like criminal activities or shortcuts to actually support the broken system back then. The only way I was able to find the people like me, it was through the music, because there was like a very strong punk, hard rock, hardcore scene. And if you go to these parties, if you go to these clubs, you'll find the people like you. All the things I mentioned before, it was not present. It was not glorified. So that was our way to escape, I would say.
I want to know more about this hard rock, punk rock scene that was present in Serbia as an alternative space.
First thing first, there was a couple of bands which was also present sometimes on TV. So it's also maybe important to mention that unlike Vučić today, Milošević didn't close every single TV or every single radio station. There was still some points when you can hear some opponent's opinion maybe and some opposition music, so to say. So there was no declared band who says like we are against Milošević, so they didn't wrote that on their album's cover or somewhere, you know. But it was quite clear that if you listen to those bands, you're a rebel in a way. So it was fun because it was just come out of nowhere. It wasn't planned by any means. It was just like a natural process, because everyone who supported this violent regime and this like violence on the street, they would listen to some music we called turbo folk, right?
Yes.
The opposite of that, it was hard rock, hardcore, punk, all the other things, right? Yes. And that's why we just like naturally migrated toward that movement. It was interesting enough that like since very early age, I went into that movement, so that I was, I don't know, 9 or 10 when we found the audio tape of some band on the parking spot. Then we play it at home, we enjoy it, then we start buying the other albums and so on and so forth. And yeah, that's how it happens, like almost accidentally. But I think if I didn't found that tape, I will somehow end up in that group anyway.
So you were destined to be part of that scene.
I think so. Yeah. I feel like.
Control.
we've moved now 30 years, like since the 90s, since the wars. In your understanding, what has changed and what remained the same in Serbia since then?
I mean, the difference is huge, definitely, in the terms how people are living. So we are comparing some very different times, right? Like in the 90s, as I just explained, it was a lot of crime everywhere and a lot of uncertainty. I think that vanished somehow. Today, for example, my mother can go around and don't have to look for her purse. You know what I mean? That things are gone. Yeah, Belgrade become a sterile place compared to what used to be in the 90s. But there is a things which still haven't changed, or it haven't changed in a pace which I love or which I want. I'm particularly talking about nationalism. So how to put it? What Milosevic did for Serbia in the 90s, that was a damage which was irreparable for already 30 years, I think. He just made the whole nation believe that everything that nation did was right. And like it's a clear mechanism how they did it. There is events in history, the Serbian history in particular, when Serbian was like the Serbian army in particular was the good guys. It was on the right side of the wars, you know what I mean? So we're talking about, for example, the Second World War and the events before. And they use that narrative as an empowering force to basically drive all the ethnic and national cleansing during the 90s. You have to understand when they teach you in a school that everything the Serbian army doing is right, you start like slowly to believe in that, and you start to finding excuses for everything. So then even today, that's the problem which haven't changed in Serbia. Even today, people denying what's happened in Srebrenica. So I can tell you the one example which was so prominent to me that I could not forget it for a month. There is a one Serbian writer, Arsenijević Vladimir, and he was once in a podcast, and he told the story. It's a first-hand story from him when he was journalist, I think, in the 2000. Let's say 5 or plus minus 2 years. And they were making a reportage about excavating the victims in Peručas Lake. So mostly we are talking about civilians, mostly kids and old people, right? Mostly Albanian nationals.
Yes.
And then he was making a reportage on the spot because it was a big event. On the other side of the lake, there was a dude who swam, right? And then they were so curious, they were so puzzled about that. And then they went on the other side and met him and asked him openly, like, do you feel uncomfortable about swimming in the same lake when, you know, like the body's falling apart just like on the other side? And the guy answered like, I don't know. I don't really believe in that. It was the moment when you realize that there is a people who can literally watch things in front of their eyes and still deny it. So it's the feeling I had about how the most of population living there is they constantly, like in a matrix, they constantly taking I don't know, is it red or blue pill? Help me, the one which keeps you in the matrix, you know.
Yes.
So they constantly taking that pill which like keep them inside the matrix, and they are constantly like fueling that narrative that everything was just right, only Serbians are victims, and so on and so forth. What this national rhetoric can make to the people.
You were speaking about your relationship with Serbia and how like moving physically can add to the distance. Yes, we are from these countries, but once you remove physically, you miss a lot. You are not part of the grain anymore. But something that I'm curious about because of this podcast, and clearly because I don't know, and perhaps the listeners will not know either, how is the Serbian diaspora viewed in Serbia?
That's a great question. I unfortunately don't have an answer to that because I don't know. I never spoke with people about how they're viewing diaspora. I think it's not uncommon to have someone living abroad. So therefore, there is no much talk when someone is coming from the other country. I don't know. Does that make sense? For me, I was always thinking of that as a change, like a simple changing a place of living, like nothing wrong with it, and like that you don't have to be tied to your country as you move somewhere else.
When you go back, what are your experiences?
It's not so far away that it feels like another planet, right?
Mhm.
So we are still in Europe. There is still a lot of opportunities to come by plane. As some people like to travel with a car. So yeah, I mean, my mother, for example, she's just taking her backpack and visiting me every 2-3 months, maybe not 2 but 3 or 4 months maybe, and she stays for a couple of days and went back. So it's not big of an issue, I think.
You're mentioning on and off your life in Berlin. When you moved to Berlin, where your most pressing struggle as a new migrant? Because after all, it's a new environment.
I think that the struggle was the only real in the first year, when everything is new, when you basically found yourself that without a SIM card for your phone, without anything, and that's the when you actually feel the struggle, because you don't know where the streets are, you don't know where to go for certain things, but slowly you learn, and it's not a big of a deal, I would say, because of course in Germany many things are well organized, so you won't struggle a lot to find your way through. So I have to say that I felt home like almost instantly. So let's say it took me maybe a couple of months.
That's great to hear. But also another issue, you're raising a child in Germany who is now learning a new language, or perhaps what are some nuances from this experience?
Yeah, I mean that's an interesting question, and I see the different approaches. For me, it's I really see it as an advantage to know many languages, to maybe also understand multiple cultures, and then you don't have a surprises later on in your life when you meet someone new. So that's very cool. I also love the fact that we are living in Berlin, so my kids are like, my older son is already trilingual, so because he's also speaks English. That's just I only see it as an advantage. But I also want to be clear that maybe I have a different perspective than the other diaspora's parents. In that sense, I don't push a culture on my kids, so I don't want them to be exact copy of myself. I wanted them to be themselves. So I wanted them to be comfortable in the culture they're growing up. Of course, I will probably always be a little bit different to them, but that's fine.
Yes.
It's like my father was like different to me, and some places he mentioned with such emotions, I never understood why, because I never been to these places, so I don't wanna also push that to them. My history, my memory is mine, and they have their own. So that's how I view it.
And that's a very democratic way to respect the individuality of your child, and then also encourage their evolution in ways that, it's healthy. And I'm very happy to hear this, especially, But this brings us to the very end of this conversation. And there is one question that I ask every guest. The question is, if you could bring one thing that is missing for you in Berlin from Serbia, what would it be?
I do have an answer straight away, but it's maybe not what you expected. It's my memories. That's the only thing which I feel it's actually trapped in a place, if you know what I mean. So whenever I go to Belgrade, whenever I walk certain streets, whenever I go into a specific place, there is some sort of a feeling, some goosebumps, like something in your stomach going on, and that's the thing you cannot actually bring. Everything else I can. Like if I want to relocate my mother, that would be processed, but it's possible. If I want to bring my old sofa, that's also not an issue. But the memories is remain there. Sometimes I feel a little bit sad about that, but not sad in a way that I want to go back. But I'm sad because something remind me of those memories, and I know that they're gone. They're basically trapped there. I will just tell you maybe a story out of nowhere. 2022, I think, I ran my Belgrade full marathon. that was such a great way to say goodbye to the city, because I was running through the streets where I used to live before, and in the multiple places, and I had a chance to kind of emotionally say goodbye to all of these places. What I saw is the other people who are living there. They're living their own lives. They're having their different realities than mine, you know? So everything changed, including myself. So we just kind of like a handshake on that race, me and Belgrade, and we say goodbye forever, because I think that that's the moment when I realized that there is some other people, there is some other destinies going on there, and I'm not part of it anymore. I was so long outside that the whole world happened there, and I'm just not part of it anymore.
So sad to hear.
But it's not sad. No. It's actually it was emotionally relieving.
Okay, because there is a lot of nostalgia also involved in this. It's like trying to take in as much of the city as possible, you know, to take note, to have an inventory of it for saying goodbye. And on this note, then, thank you so much, Damnjan, for accepting my invitation, for being part of this discussion. It was a pleasure hosting you today.
Thank you, Rina, so much for your invitation. It's absolutely my pleasure.